Well, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little bit ghostly looking, but I don't know what's causing this. I've tried to put it right. So anyway, maybe better looking at me like this anyway. uh, so I'm going to do a talk now called "In the Garden of the Muse." It's a talk I gave a few years back, but so hopefully you'll enjoy it. So a few years ago, before this, I gave a talk entitled "The Temple of the Muse." And this was a follow-up to this, but it stands on its own. So we tend to think of the muse as some kind of inspiration. I want in this talk to look at how certain poets and philosophers are inspired by their muse, often their higher selves, and how this manifests in inspiring writing and dialogue. Then I will look at the subject in a more practical way. So we have been in the temple, now we are to wander in the garden, where many different flowers grow, with varying properties, as we shall discover this afternoon. Sadly, only about 1% of the people I would like to have included will be mentioned here. I'll try to find representatives from many traditions. But I don't want to flood everyone with quotes. But actually, I love the words of so many people that I could easily do that. Now, H.P. Blavatsky, in an article entitled Genius, writes about the two kinds of genius, the false and the true. She says, great genius, therefore, if true and innate, and not merely an abnormal expansion of our human intellect, can never copy or condescend to imitate, but will ever be original, sui generis, in its creative impulses and realizations. Like those gigantic Indian lilies that shoot out from the clefts and fissures of the cloud-nursing and bare rocks on the highest plateau of the Nilgiri Hills, true genius needs but an opportunity to spring forth into existence and blossom in the sight of all in the most arid soil. For its stamp is always unmistakable. To use a popular saying, innate genius, like murder, will out sooner or later, and the more it will have been suppressed and hidden, the greater will be the flood of light thrown by the sudden eruption. On the other hand, artificial genius, so often confused with the former, and which in truth is but the outcome of long studies and training, will never be more than, so to say, the flame of a lamp burning outside the portal of the pane. It may throw a long trail of light across the road, but it leaves the inside of the building in darkness. And as every faculty and property in nature is dual, i.e., each may be made to serve two ends, evil as well as good, so will artificial genius betray itself. Born out of the chaos of terrestrial sensations, of perceptive and retentive faculties, yet of finite memory, it will ever remain the slave of its body, and that body, owing to its unreliability and the natural tendency of matter to confusion, will not fail to lead even the greatest genius, so-called, back into its own primordial element, which is chaos, again, or evil, or earth. Thus, between the true and the artificial genius, one born from the light of the immortal ego, the other from the evanescent will-o'-the-wisp of the terrestrial or purely human intellect, and the animal soul, there is a chasm to be spanned only by him or her who aspires ever onwards, who never loses sight, even when, in the depth of matter, of that guiding star, the divine soul and mind, or what we call Buddhi Manas. And that's the mind illumined by Buddhi, the intuition. So even H.P. Blavatsky there was complying with our simile of the garden by mentioning the Indian lilies. So far, so good then. So what we often call genius is merely the result of good memory. like those people who are excellent at mathematics or other worldly processes. Even athletes, like the ones who are competing at the various games, the Olympic Games, etc., are regarded as geniuses in a certain way. But real genius comes from the higher divine nature and can be said to proceed from Erato, the muse of poetry, who symbolizes the mysterious something that enables certain individuals to express things in a way that resonates with the soul and spirit rather than with the intellect. One of these was certainly Plotinus, the Neoplatonic philosopher from the early centuries of the Christian era. His treatise on beauty is a veritable treasure house of vivid poetic imagery, and the whole tone of the piece leads us as high as imagery will take us, and then leaves us to go beyond into a realm of pure light. And I've done a talk on Plotinus, so I've used these quotes, and I'll use them again here because they're so beautiful and potent in their meaning. He writes, it must be therefore that since the soul's nature is what it is, and ranks among the highest essences in the order of things, when she sees something akin to herself, or even a vestige of kinship, she rejoices and flutters her wings, and receives it within her, and remembers her true self, and that which is hers. What then is the similitude between that which is beautiful here and that which is beautiful yonder? Beautiful words. And later he says, but leaving sense perceptions below, let us ascend higher and contemplate those beauties which are beyond and above, which the eye of sense can no longer behold, but which the soul without need of sense organs beholds and pronounces beautiful. Just as we could never have described sensible beauties if we had never seen them, nor recognized them as beautiful, for example, if we had been born blind, so neither can we describe the beauty of pursuits and sciences and things of this kind, unless we are ourselves intimately familiar with their beauty. Nor speak of the beauty of virtue if we have never beheld how fair is the countenance of temperance and justice, more beautiful than the evening and morning stars. But these can be seen only by that eye of the soul, which beholds such beauties. And when we behold them, we should be affected by delight and astonishment, and by a fluttering of the soul's wings in a far greater degree than in the case of sensible beauties. For we have now reached true beauty. For the experiences which shall be produced by that which is really beautiful are wonder and sweet amazement and desire and a pleasant fluttering of the wings of the soul. Lots of fluttering of our spiritual wings here. And all souls, one might say, may be and are affected in this way by invisible beauties, but especially those which are of a most loving disposition. Just as in the case of corporeal beauty, all behold it, yet are not equally stirred by it, but especially those who are called lovers, true lovers. So here we have the key to the argument by some modern artists, musicians, writers, etc., that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Gautama Buddha, in the Diamond Sutra, talks of having several eyes, from the most material to the most spiritual. And we may say that there are perhaps 7 eyes. So it depends which eye we use as to what we see as beautiful. Those immersed in the material world may find beauty in a nice car or a good meal, and others may find it in things that many of us here would find repellent. Even the Muse herself, like Venus in Plato's Symposium, will have her different levels from which the poet may draw his or her inspiration. But if we are true aspirants, trying to live the life that we need to discover within ourselves, what resonates with the spiritual part of our being, we need to open the divine eye. Plotinus continues to give us advice in this direction in one of my favourite passages from spiritual literature, and again I've used this many, many times. How then may you behold the beauty of a virtuous soul? Withdraw into yourself and look. And if you do not yet behold yourself beautiful, do as does the maker of a statue, which is to be beautified. For he cuts away here, shaves down, smooths and cleans it, until he has made manifest in the statue the beauty of the face which he portrays. So with yourself, cut away all that is superfluous, straighten that which is crooked, purify that which is obscure, labour to make all bright, and never cease to fashion your statue, until there shall shine out upon you the godlike splendour of virtue, until you behold temperance established in purity in her holy shrine. If you have become this, and have beheld it, and dwell within yourself in purity, and there is now nothing which prevents you from thus becoming one, when you have nothing foreign mingled with your interior nature, but your whole self is true light, and light alone, not measured by size, not circumscribed by the limitations of any figure, not to be increased in magnitude because unbounded, but totally immeasurable, greater than all measure, and mightier than every quantity. If you behold yourself grown to this, having now become vision itself, take courage and ascend yet higher, for now you need a guide no more. Gaze intently and see. This eye alone beholds that mighty beauty, but if it approaches the vision blurred by vices, unpurified or weak through cowardice, so that it cannot bear to gaze upon such glory, then it sees nothing, even though another should be at hand to point out that which all may see. For he that beholds must be akin to that which he beholds, and must, before he comes to this vision, be transformed into its likeness. Never could the eye have looked upon the sun and it not become sun-like, and never can soul see beauty unless she has become beautiful. So this very language helps our soul to flower in the garden of the Muse. There's a certain level of consciousness that one touches on that cannot be put into words. But those who feel the need to or want to share with others have to find a way to express these feelings in a manner that will in some vague way represent the actual experience, rather than intellectualized and therefore misrepresented. Not just writers, but also musicians try to do this, and often music gets closer to the truth than words ever could, so long as the musician is a master of his craft. And this does not apply just to classical music, but to a variety of forms. It is not just the music, but also the person who creates the music, as it is with the written word too. Sweeping across to the 18th century, to Japan, the haiku poet Masuo Basho muses on his love of poetry and this inability to express totally what one would like to, which I've often felt myself. In this mortal frame of mine, which is made of 100 bones and 9 orifices, there is something, and this something is called a windswept spirit, for lack of a better name. For it is much like a thin drapery that is torn and swept away at the slightest stir of the wind. This something in me took to writing poetry years ago, merely to amuse myself at first, but finally making it its lifelong business. It must be admitted, however, that there were times when it sank into such dejection that it was almost ready to drop its pursuit, or again, times when it was so puffed up with pride that it exulted in vain victories over the others. Indeed, ever since it began to write poetry, it has never found peace within itself, always wavering between doubts of one kind and another. At one time, it wanted to gain security by entering the service of a court, and at another it wished to measure the depth of its ignorance by trying to be a scholar, which I was very interesting. But it was prevented from either because of its unquenchable love of poetry. The fact is, it knows no other art than the art of writing poetry, and therefore it hangs on to it more or less blindly. So Basho here expresses what most poets experience, which is something, as he says, that certain individuals are born with. It nags at them all their lives, and everything takes second place to the muse, something that the more intellectually orientated can never understand. Hence the lowly position that poetry has in this mainly material and intellectual society. Another brilliant discourse on the muse and poetry is by Percy Bysshe Shelley, the English poet in the 19th century, who wrote a defense of poetry. In a section regarding its effects on society, he writes, "Poetry is ever accompanied with pleasure. All spirits on which it falls open themselves to receive the wisdom which is mingled with its delight. In the infancy of the world, neither poets themselves nor their auditors are fully aware of the excellency of poetry. For it acts in a divine and unapprehended manner, beyond and above consciousness. And it is reserved for future generations to contemplate and measure the mighty cause and effect in all the strength and splendour of their union. A poet is a nightingale who sits in darkness and sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet sounds. His auditors are as men entranced by the melody of an unseen musician, who feel that they are moved and softened, yet know not whence or why." And he concludes by saying, "Poets are the hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration, the mirrors of the gigantic shadows which futurity casts upon the present, the words which express what they understand not, the trumpets which sing to battle and feel not what they inspire, the influence which is moved not, but moves. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world." And let's roll back to the 4th century to someone called Lu Ji in his Art of Writing, another one of my favourite books. And he reinforces this last comment as he says, "The use of literature lies in its conveyance of every truth. It expands the horizons to make space infinite and serves as a bridge that spans a myriad years. It maps all roads and paths for posterity and mirrors the models of worthy ancients, that the tottering edifices of the sage kings of antiquity may be reared again, and their admonishing voices, wind-borne since past times, may resume full expression. No regions are too remote, but it pervades. No truth too subtle to be woven into its vast web. Like mist and rain, it permeates and nourishes and manifests all the powers of transformation in which gods and spirits share. Virtue it makes endure and radiate on brass and stone. It resounds in an eternal stream of melodies, ever renewed on flutes and strings." So from these preceding quotes, we can see that poetic inspiration has a profound effect on the consciousness and can actually perfume our souls with the incense of the spirit. So we wander in our garden. 'Tis a warm summer's afternoon. The sun is low in the sky and casts a golden light over everything. The radiance filters through the trees and dapples the path we walk with pools of gold. On either side of this walkway are many flowers of different kinds and colours. Some are delicate, some are strong and hardy. We sit and contemplate how all of this may relate to our subject and reveal to us how the garden of humanity is also full of such a beautiful variety that makes it so wonderful. I remember reading something by Thich Nhat Hanh the Buddhist, Zen Buddhist teacher who died recently, the Vietnamese, what he said, that we should think of ourselves as flowers, and the way we grow is to be watered by love. So we think of our fellow human beings as flowers. What makes them grow in spirit and in compassion and love is to water them with love, water them with our love. So there are many ways to express what is inexpressible in our deepest intuitions, many hearts that are reflections of the great heart of humanity. The Muse is a symbol of that nameless source of inspiration. Now, one of the meanings of the word Olympian is superior to mundane affairs. To be in the world, but not of it. This doesn't mean wandering about in a trance or having an arrogant attitude, but it means to me having true perspective and awareness of what is real and what is Maya or illusion, because it passes in time. We have to find what is permanent out of time. And it says in the voice of the silence, true peace can only be found in the realm of peace and silence. All of us have this Olympian spirit within us, to use a conceptual term. Really, there is no inner or outer, no above or below. All is one. So we come to see the Muse as symbolic of our higher nature, or the higher self. All the great words I've used at the beginning of this talk from different cultures and periods of time prove the identical nature of the experience. But not everyone is poetic or musical. So there are as many ways as there are people to try to get it across, or just to keep it sacred within the precincts of one's very own heart. We can all see ourselves as flowers in the garden of the Muse. This is real flower power, perhaps. What we do often feel is the whispering of the spirit deep within us. Often this is known as the voice of the silence, and is like the soughing of the wind in the pines in the forest beyond our garden. There's a transcendental beauty in all this, a beauty we feel incapable of expressing. It seems almost desecrated and belittled by words, yet there is something, as Bashil said earlier, that compels us to find a sparkle in the midst of the light that can somehow be captured. And just as a drop of water may give us just a tiny inkling of the nature of an ocean, so this sparkle of words may kindle within us, within our hearts, the flame that may become the fire of an endless beauty that one day may drown us in an ocean of bliss by the very alchemy that transforms the baseness of our material nature into the pure gold of enlightened understanding, if understanding is the right word. Now, something else that I've used many times is by George William Russell, a Victorian, well, he goes into Edwardian times, Irish member of the Theosophical Society. So in our garden, twilight approaches, the most mystical of times. And A.E. writes in his essay on the hour of twilight, for the future, we intend that at this hour, the mystic shall be at home, less metaphysical and scientific than is his wont, but more really himself or herself. It is customary at this hour, before the lamps are brought in, to give way a little and dream, letting all the tender fancies day suppresses rise up in our minds, whether it is spent, wherever it is spent, whether in the dusky room or walking home through the blue evening, all things grow strangely softened and united. The magic of the old world reappears. The commonplace streets take on something of the grandeur and solemnity of starlit avenues, of Egyptian temples. The public squares in the mingled glow and gloom grow beautiful as the Indian grove where Sakuntala wandered with her maidens. The children chase each other through the dusky shrubberies. As they flee past, they look at us with long remembered glances. Lulled by the silence, we forget a little while the hard edges of the material and remember that we are spirits. Now is the hour for memory. Time to call in and make more securely our own all stray and beautiful ideas that visited us during the day and which might otherwise be forgotten. We should draw them in from the region of things felt to the region of things understood. In a focus burning with beauty and pure with truth, we should bind them. For from the thoughts that thus gathered in something accrues to the consciousness. The thoughts thus gathered in something accrues to the consciousness. On the morrow, a change impalpable, but real has taken place in our being. We see beauty and truth through everything. I think most of us can relate to this feeling at the twilight hour. If you have time today, go out and explore it. It's not pouring down like it is now. It has been for the last few days. These things are precious beyond words. In Japan, they have moon viewing parties and excursions to see the cherry blossoms. Such simple things hold great meaning for them spiritually. We tend to seek our pleasure in man-made entertainments. Although we do go into the countryside and admire the view, it is often a case of familiarity breeds contempt, or at least indifference. H.P. Blavatsky says in an article, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, where are the aesthetes of a few years ago? Was this little confederation of the lovers of art but one of the soap bubbles of our fin de siècle, rich in promise and suggestion of many a possibility, but dead in works and act? Or if there are any true lovers of art yet left among them, why do they not organise and send out missionaries the world over to tell picturesque Japan and other countries ready to fall victims that to imitate the will-o'-the-wisp of European culture and fascination means for a non-Christian land the committing of suicide, that it means sacrificing one's individuality for an empty show and shadow. At best, it's to exchange the original and the picturesque for the vulgar and the hideous. Truly and indeed it is high time that at last something should be done in this direction, and before the deceitful civilization of the conceited nations of but yesterday has irretrievably hypnotized the older races and made them succumb to its upper-tree wiles and supposed superiority. Otherwise, old arts and artistic creations, everything original and unique, will very soon disappear. Already national dresses and time-honoured customs and everything beautiful, artistic and worth preservation is fast disappearing from view. At no distant day, alas, the best relics of the past will perhaps be found only in museums, in sorry, solitary and beticketed samples preserved under glass. Such is the work and the unavoidable result of our modern civilization, skin deep in reality, in its visible effects, in the blessings it is alleged to have given to the world. Its roots are rotten to the core. It is to its progress that selfishness and materialism, that the greatest curses of the nations, are due, and the latter will most surely lead to the annihilation of art and of the appreciation of the truly harmonious and beautiful. So, this may be seen to be happening to a greater or lesser degree in certain countries. But of course, there have always been those individuals and groups that we are discussing today that have tried to keep that beauty and appreciation alive on all levels. And there's also beautiful art movements like the Pre-Raphaelites who've created a lot of beauty and light in the world. But we can see in modern society a lot of the art is very materialistic and very dark very it doesn't radiate any great spiritual beauty. The 14th century Kashmir poetess Lala, one of my favourites, wrote, "As my love and my faith and my interest in the inner grew, the darkness diminished within and without, and Lala lost herself in that light." That is an incredible, incredible poem. I'll say it again. As my love and my faith and my interest in the inner grew, the darkness diminished within and without, and Lala lost herself in that light. It just seems to me that sums everything up admirably. If we take into account what we are all doing as theosophical and spiritual students, it is just as Lala says. We are here to lose ourselves, our lower nature. And the Maha Chohan, who was the master's master, again, I've mentioned him in previous talks, he said all of us have to get rid of our own ego, the illusory apparent self, to recognize our true self in a transcendental divine life. But if we would not be selfish, we must strive to make other people see that truth and recognize the reality of the transcendental self, the Buddha, the Christ, the God of every creature. To follow the way of the Theosophical Masters, inspiration and guide, Gautama Buddha, we must learn to share what we have with others to the best of our ability. This is again what all the individuals mentioned have tried to do, and what the Theosophical movement in general is doing in the world. We must be careful not to fall into the trap of becoming immersed too much in the intellectual teachings. It is said in the Crest Jewel of Wisdom that the mind can be lost in a labyrinth of words, like a man in a thick forest. Therefore, we must learn to minimalize the use of the intellect and develop the intuition. Though the lower mind is very clever, it traps us in concepts to keep hold on us, so that we delight in dwelling on technical details, while all the time we are being led further from the truth, whilst believing we are getting closer. So now the first star twinkles in the sky as night approaches in our garden. The aroma of night-scented flowers grows stronger as darkness approaches. So a great silence falls over everything, like a comforting cloak. In silence, we discover many things that the chattering mind shuts out. The lower mind gives us so many reasons to worry about things that are relatively unimportant, another trick to distract us from our soul's purpose. Of course, in modern society, the nightmare is far from silent, or the nighttime is far from silent. Maybe the nightmare is for some. In modern society, the nighttime is far from silent, but we must imagine ourselves in our mystical garden, where all is tranquil and calm, and we can let our minds roam amongst the stars, whilst feeling the coolness of the breeze. Darkness to the lower mind is light to the higher, and vice versa. Personally, I've no real interest in physical sport, but if we can transfer the energy and ideas onto a higher plane, then it may help us in our quest. If we can begin to take the position of the higher self, then we can certainly begin to regard ourselves as spiritual beings, temporarily inhabiting this mortal frame. Pythagoras told us to take heart, for the race of man is divine. If we can begin to regard ourselves as denizens of eternity, then what is good, true, and beautiful in all of us will begin to dawn. And what a wondrous thing this dawning is, when first light is kindled deep within our hearts, and all lesser lights seem pale in comparison. In our garden, in the dawn light, we know there is no death. How many times have we seen the flowers come and go, leaves fall from trees only to return again? The melancholy yet beautiful feelings of twilight give way to the apparent silence of the night, and then the sunrise again. Endless cycles, wheels within wheels. The same process for us individuals as for planets, solar systems, and universes. We are on our way to the timeless through the illusions of time, children of the universe. So many people through the ages have had these intimations of immortality, as Wordsworth put it, and many have tried to at least sprinkle our souls with fairy dust, to at least help us to sparkle with some kind of recognition. But of course, the journey has to be completed by us alone, though with a lot of assistance from our friends on the way. Sadly, less and less writers, artists, musicians, and poets are taking their inspiration from the higher aspects of the Muse. We still have the writings of the ancients, which are able to stir our souls and often give us the wings to fly onto that higher ground. And of course, there are many writers, poets, and musicians, even nowadays, who are doing beautiful work on a spiritual level. And so we leave our garden to return to the temple of our soul. As we do, we walk through the grove of cherry trees, and the words of the Japanese writer Kakuso Okakura from his book of Tea are with us in our minds, where he says, "Some flowers glory in death. Certainly the Japanese cherry blossoms do, as they freely surrender themselves to the winds. For a moment they hover like bejeweled clouds and dance over the crystal streams. Then as they sail away on the laughing waters, they seem to say, 'Farewell, O spring, we are on our way to eternity.'" So the Olympian spirit is one that courageously braves the challenges that comes its way and makes use of them to help it on its way to the eternal, hopefully with the compassion to help others it comes into contact with on its journey. Because of course we are all one in the final analysis. We are all pilgrims on our way to the heart of the universe. If we can learn to see that all that happens to us is meant to be and is designed to help us if we adopt the right attitude, then life, though it may not become any easier, at least becomes invested with meaning, and we can proceed onwards with the knowledge that we are part of the divine plan, and that the light grows stronger within us as we proceed. A light that brings into focus many things that were obscure to us, and who knows where it will all end. Indeed, if it ever does. And I'll finish by repeating that poem by Lala. As my love and my faith and my interest in the inner grew, the darkness diminished within and without, and Lala lost herself in that light. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. And may there be peace on earth. May people realize that we're all one within. And may we start to see each other as spiritual beings, children of the light, denizens of eternity. Thank you.